Hi everyone, welcome to a tactics video, this time how to use Astra Militarum scout units. This video is in a series of videos looking at how to actually use Astra Militarum units, less about the individual units, but what do they do conceptually as a unit in your toolkit. It's been a while since I've done a video, been very busy with work, got quite sick, and also the Teams tournament as well, which is super fun. But here we are to do another tactics video, so how to use scout units. So if you're new to the channel, remember, I'm a true variety of Astra Militarum, covering everything from the lore of Astra Militarum, where I draw my ex-military experience, been a rifleman in the Australian Army many years ago. Tactics videos like this one here, and then also building, assembling, and kit bash videos from a hobby point of view. So right, let's get into the actual video straight away. Now, in the new codex, which is very exciting, it's been out now for a couple of weeks, we've got actually several scout options, scout unit options to choose from. I can see 6. If I've missed one, please tell me. But we've got, of course, the Catchan Jungle Fighters, Catchan Heavy Weapon teams, Catchan Command Squad, the Kasrikin, the Kreig Engineers, and also Scout Sentinels. Now, remember, of course, dedicated transports, if they've got any of these models on board, except for, of course, a Scout Sentinel can't go on a transport. That means that dedicated transport, currently, which is a Chimera or Taurox, can also scout move the applicable movement characteristics of the embarked models. So basically means all of the infantry models here, they can scout 6, which therefore means your Chimera, or your Taurox can also scout 6 as well. So again, let's not focus too much on the actual units themselves. There's plenty of videos out there probably assessing which of these are the best in the current meta. But my favourite go-to pick at the moment probably is just Catchan Jungle Fighter, 65 points, OC2, and a very effective early screen to get things going. So a lot of options here. As said, 6 previously. I think we only had we had 3 in the index, Jungle Fighters, Kasrikin and Scout Sentinels. Now we've got 3 more, which is absolutely fantastic. So that's the options we've got at the moment. So like the other videos, I'm going to now look at what they won't do, the negatives, and also what they will do, the positives. So what won't they do? So what they will do, which is bad, is be counter-screened by your opponent's infiltrate units. So if your opponent's got infiltrators, a very smart move they could do is basically string them across the entire board length as much as possible, and basically mean that when you try and scout, you can't actually scout any distance because they're within 9 of your deployment zone, and therefore you can probably scout a max of 3 inches, for example. So try and pin you into your deployment zone. You could be counter-screened by other scout units. Now, this is probably a bit more limited, because depending on how big their scout move is from the deployment zone. But the other cheek I want to watch out for is Space Marine Scouts, the actual Scouts, teenage Space Marines. They've got both infiltrate and scout. So therefore they can be placed in no man's land, and if your opponent goes first or second, they can be scout moved applicably, and that means they could even pin you in further. And we'll talk about how to manage that in a moment. So do watch out for that, is that your opponent, if they've got infiltrate units, could basically turn off your scout move, and likewise, if they've got scout move units as well, they could basically also counter-screen you as well to a degree. Another one to always think about, and this applies to every single data sheet in 40k, is if you're not using the scout move, you aren't basically getting full value from that data sheet. So quite conceptual that, but basically you are paying in theory for 110 points for the Kasrikin. They've got multiple different rules. They've got scout. They can give themselves order. They've got a melter mine. They've got special weapons. If you don't use every part of that data sheet, you're basically leaving points on the table. So across these 6 units here, they've all got scout moves of varying lengths, or basically 6 inch, 6 inch, 6 inch, 6 inch, and 9 inch on the Scout Sentinel. And if you don't use that in turn 1, you're basically paying it for nothing, if that makes sense. That doesn't mean you should always scout. We'll talk about some scenarios where you shouldn't, but do keep that in mind. And definitely if you're newer to 40k, and I've only really got 40k in the last 12 months, it's important to remember that, is that you should be trying to basically maximise every single rule in this data sheet to get the full value out of the points you've paid in your army list. Cool. The other one to watch out for, this is probably something you would make mistakes if you're newer to 40k, is giving your opponent overwhelming force, storm hostile objective, the secondary objective. Now, if you scout onto an objective, for example, therefore that means turn 1 they could actually get overwhelming force, storm hostile objective. Now, secondary objective is obviously a very important part of 40k. You get, I think it's 50 points maybe, or 40 points of your total 100 points across the course of the game comes from secondary objectives. And if you basically scout move a Scout Sentinel onto an objective, say before the game begins, that basically means your opponent could either kill that model and get overwhelming force, or also storm hostile, taking that objective off you. So broadly speaking, with your scout moves, you shouldn't be scouting onto an objective. You should be scouting literally just off the objective and then obviously going from there. And we'll talk about that in a bit more time. So be very, very clear. Do watch out for infiltrate or other scout units. Make sure you are actually scouting these units. And do, of course, as I said here, don't scout onto an objective turn 1 before the game begins, because you could actually give your opponent 2 easy secondary objectives. Cool. What will they do? What are the positives? They will allow you to set up your game plan. Now, definitely Astra Militarum, regardless of all the new attachments, is an army which likes a plan. It likes to sort of play honest Warhammer. That's kind of changing at the moment. We'll see how it all washes out with the new detachments. But broadly speaking, Guard is an army which likes to grind out many, many turns, slowly win the war of attrition for multiple units, and this allows you to sort of even get that started before the game begins. Now, we'll talk about that in a couple of scenarios in a second on TTS, Tabletop Simulator, but basically think of the positive here, and this ties into basically this second point, is firstly, it gives you free movement. Now, Guard is not an army which has got like endless amounts of movements, and broadly speaking, it is changing a bit with the new codex, is that where you deploy your units in one corner, they're not going to get to the other side of the tabletop easily over the course of 5 turns. But given this is mostly on infantry units, they can move through walls, you're basically giving yourself an extra 6 inches, yeah? Now that then ties off to obviously giving you space, and what I mean by space is basically the more of the board you control, the better it is for you, because you've got more places to be, you can sort of screen out more stuff, and broadly speaking, you can probably achieve more secondary objectives. And of course, it creates early pressure for your opponent. If you scout move loads of units, that basically means that they've got to do something about it in their turn. And again, it's all about board control, broadly speaking. So that's a massive positive here, is it gives you free movement, giving you space, and also creating early pressure on your opponent. Now, this one is huge, and I learnt this the hard way playing World Eaters at a team's tournament. I'll never forget this mistake. And just one thing with that, I'm digressing, but the best lessons you can learn are from the toughest games, and that was a horrible game, a lot of massive lessons. So it allows you to set up screens against chargy armies, and also helps towards building screens for turn 2 deep strike or rapid ingress. Now we're going to look at this very, very carefully in a moment on Tabletop Simulator, but basically, if your opponent's got advance and charge, can call the wire, whatever it is, these units are critical for basically not getting you clogged up in your deployment zone and losing the game because you're basically stuck in your deployment zone for 5 turns, which I was against World Eaters. Now, of course, against turn 2 deep strike, of course, you can push your units out to sort of push that screen in turn 2. But if you went second in the roll-off, you want to get that scout move out early, and that at least means that you can actually get a couple more, or at least 6 more inches on your infantry units, or 9 more inches on your scout sentinel, to push out the screen for that angry deep strike or rapid ingress which your opponent's got sat in their back pocket. Now, of course, as I said, this should allow you to score early secondary objectives easily. Now, Guard is an army where you've got usually multiple units. You should never be not scoring any of the easy secondaries in turn 1s and 2. Easy secondaries would be area denial, for example, containment, sabotage, or any other action-based objectives. And we'll talk about that in deployment in a second. Now, this doesn't necessarily apply just to scout units. You can basically do this with your entire sort of deployment, because Guard typically does have loads of units. Is you should never be not scoring, say, containment turn 1, because that's 6 points in the bank. Bang, fantastic one to get early. Now, of course, some of these units can do damage. Again, I don't want to talk about individuals too much, but certainly Kasrikin can do significant damage. The Kreig engineers with their free grenade stratagem, plus also the basically the Cyclops demolition bomb they've got now, or whatever it's called, the remote mine. Those units can definitely do damage. Catchan Command Squad maybe could do a bit of damage, but broadly speaking, across the other ones, and Catchan Heavy Weapon Team could do damage, but we're probably not going to be sort of throwing them away. But again, some of these units, but let's agree, say this one and this one, the engineers and the Kasrikin, can apply some early damage quite early into your opponent's sort of other skirmishing units, or being quite aggressive. But the other ones, of course, again, Jungle Fighters are my favourite. They're just cheap and cheerful, 65 points, OC2, and basically all they're really doing is either doing actions, turning off secondaries, or being screens. But definitely, as I said, these two options here can definitely pick up units, the right units, if you need to. And of course, in this instance, it's going to be basically against other infantry targets, yeah. Of course, the Kreig engineers could get a load of mortal wounds, likewise Kasrikin and the Mathammer, but to be honest, you're probably going to do, 6 mortal wounds at best if you're lucky. That's not going to remove a transport or an enemy vehicle, for example, or a monster. But yeah, so that's what they will do. Now let's go to Tabletop Simulator, and I'm now going to basically talk through some key themes to remember. This should be quite a quick video because they're relatively straightforward, these ones, but let's remember these. So know when to put your scout units into a transport or be out of transports in a conga line. Great learning from Jeff against World Eaters. Now when to deploy them in the deployment phase will be the second. Maximising early secondaries, which is quite straightforward. Setting up to go first or go second on the roll-off, and then also watch out for consolidation moves, which basically ties into the conga line discussion as well. So let's go to Tabletop Simulator. If you don't have this, I thoroughly recommend it. If you can't get to games to meet people, simply in real life, it's a fantastic way to play. And if you're a dad like me, where my basically free time starts at 9 p.m. most nights, it's a great way to play games. Cool, so let's talk about when to be in transports versus the conga line. So in my fictitious army list, let's say I've got 2 jungle fighter squads and 2 Taurochs, so they can scout move because dedicated transports. Now, very simply, okay, so I would say the majority of the time you want to basically have these chaps in the Taurochs, yeah, so they can basically scout move the Taurochs. Now, where that is not the case, and this is where I learned a very hard lesson, is if your opponent basically has got advance and charge, they can basically close that 24-inch distance between you and their opponent and their deployment zone quite quickly, either via scout moves or just generic sort of charging abilities. That is where you basically need to decide in the point in the game early on where you decide what goes in transports, what's attached to what units, etc. That in this instance, I'm actually not going to put the jungle fighters into the Taurochs. I'm going to put something else, be it some Death Corps of Kreig, maybe even a mortar team, for example, to basically justify the fact you need to have stuff in a transport in deployment zone. But if you're playing against particularly World Eaters, my best example, or a very aggressive sort of orc list, this is where actually the better thing to do would be to basically plonk these guys out in a conga line like this. And I really wish I did this in this game against World Eaters because I didn't, and I got clogged up quite early and I conceded at turn 3. Is in that instance, I should have actually done this. Yeah, very simply plonk all these chaps in a big old fat line. And this is pretty bloody basic when I say it out loud. I'm quite disappointed I didn't get it. But this is the ultimate example because what happened is my opponent put loads of 8-bound, had Lord Invocado with some scout moving dudes as well. So basically my opponent got turn 1. He rolled first. Scout moved, I think, 9 inches and then advanced and charged and basically clogged up my entire army. For 2.5 turns before I said, this is over, man. We should probably just go get a coffee. So this is pretty straightforward because then if I went second, I would have scout moved these chaps 6. Yeah. I would have scout moved these guys 6. And I would have made sure there's a very nice, neat line of chaps basically, exactly touching here, so there's no way to get through there. I would have extended these out a bit more here to basically ensure that the first thing that my opponent had to charge was 20 jungle fighters who would die gloriously for the Emperor. But if that means that the rest of your game plan still remains and you actually can then start to shoot all these naughty World Eaters who've charged into you, that's fantastic. So do watch out for that. If you are worried that you're going to basically get gummed into your deployment zone, opting to not put scout moving units into a transport probably is the way to go. Now, that's why jungle fighters are my favourite. They're 65 points. They're cheap and cheerful. But maybe you don't have jungle fighters and you got Kasrikin. Unfortunately, you may have to basically do that with the Kasrikin. Yeah, 110 points. They're going to die for the Emperor, but someone's got to do it sometimes in certain games. You may need to also scout move the Kasrikin. Now, depending on the detachment you're playing, there are ways to protect that, maybe. But that's the thing. Sometimes it's about making hard choices, yeah, because if I didn't have jungle fighters, I still would have scout moved my Kasrikin. They would have died gloriously for the Emperor. And at least remember, their melter mine you activate it at the beginning of any phase. So if the naughty 8 bound from World Eaters had got within 6 inches of my Kasrikin, I could have popped a D3 mortal wounds into something at least. But do make sure you watch out for that. And that was a massive lesson I learned, because talking to my opponent after, I was a good lovely guy, is that if I actually had done that, it would have completely changed the shape of the game. It would have still been quite a tough game for guarding into World Eaters, but definitely would have basically made an actual fairer game of 40k. So that's the key one. I'm going to keep drilling that, is make sure you assess when to put him into a transport or just have him on foot. Big old fat line moving up to protect the rest of your army. Now let's actually jump ahead to watch out for consolidation moves. So I'm jumping ahead all over the place, but I think this is where you need to ask your opponent firstly, do you have the ability to consolidate beyond 3 inches? Some of them have certain abilities, some of them have got certain stratagems, and if that is the case, how you basically set up your screen and the rest of your army is super important. Yeah. So again, if these chaps scout move 6, let's pretend. Imagine if they did scout 6 here, just pretend, and your opponent is super nasty with some dudes, and they make the charge in here and basically get there. Yeah, so they actually got a big old fat base. Now, if you've got units up against the line here, for example, now if they can consolidate 3, you just have to be within 4, for example, that actually means in this case they could tag you, yeah? So do watch out for that. Likewise, if they've got 6-inch consolidate, that makes it quite nasty to manage. But of course, you need to sort of think about that, is that if I've scout moved these chaps 6 inches here, how am I deploying the rest of my army? Yeah, does that basically mean, say if these were some Cadian shock troops, are they deployed all the way back there? So therefore, they're well outside of 4 inches, which basically means they can't be consolidated into. So do watch out for that. That'll take a fair bit of thinking about how you deploy, and when you and where you deploy your scout units, which we'll get into in a second. Yeah, cool. So that's those two, and again, do watch out for that, because I got completely bummed by that. It was quite a terrible experience. A lovely guy, but like tough game. Okay, what's the other one? So let's talk about now when to deploy in the deployment phase. Okay, so what I mean by that is that obviously, as you know, you roll for attacker defender, someone drops first and basically drop a unit backwards and forwards until both of you finish deploying. Now, the standard questions you should always be asking your opponent has, have you got an infiltrate or scout move? If they've got infiltrate, fantastic. You want to basically see where they put their infiltrate. So if they've only got one infiltrate unit and they decide to put them, let's pretend these Kasrikin here are some scouts. Let's pretend they decide to put them, let's say they put them here. Okay. In some phase, some part of the deployment phase, they put them there. Let's say they're super aggressive, they put them there, yeah? And they put them there because they can, if they get second, they can then scout move these chaps 6 inches behind terrain, just for example, yeah? Now, what I'm getting to is I would probably be deploying your scout units last. Yeah, because once you've seen where your opponent puts down the infiltrate, and broadly speaking, when you're playing Astra Militarum, you've got more units than your opponent, you usually do, which therefore means they've got less drops than you. So, you could basically start to put down, someone to hold the backfield, some artillery, maybe you're going to put a tank commander there, for example. But when it comes to actually when you put your scout units down, you want to basically see where they've put their infiltrate first, because maybe they've been hyper-aggressive and decided to put them here, for example, outside of 9 inches, that should be, or wherever it is. Let's say they put them there on the objective, very naughty. So that therefore means that your scout movability here is basically nullified, yeah? So in that instance, you would basically put them elsewhere. You put them over here, for example, and you can then be safe and put another Taurox over here. So do watch out for that. Now, again, depending on their list, and I can't think of anything beyond scout move 9. I don't think anything can scout beyond 9. I don't believe so. But that actually means, as I'm saying this out loud, is that, okay, maybe if they go first and they play in the mirror, they could scout 9 this scout Sentinel. That actually means you're safe to do the scout move, as I think about it now, because you're outside of 9 inches of that unit. But the ultimate one to watch out for is Space Marine Scouts, which can both infiltrate and scout move, yeah? So again, in this instance, if your opponent put them here, outside 9, basically means you can't move your full 6 inches. You could move probably 3 inches. And likewise, if they went second, they basically move them back into terrain like that, for example. That's a classic Space Marine player move. So do watch out for when you're playing into infiltrate units. You want to deploy your scouts last. But of course, if they've got no infiltrate units, no scout units, then basically deploy them where you want, because you sort of can just do it as you please. There's no restrictions as far as what the opponent can do to you. Okay, setting up to go first and go second. So this is a good map to illustrate this. Is that let's pretend I have got 2 Tauroxes full of some very eager jungle fighters. So in this one, this is basically how I'll always deploy in this map, is that say I want to basically be able to apply early pressure to this objective here, for example. Now, if your opponent's got loads of shooting stuff, maybe he's got like a nasty tank which can pop out here and shoot down this fire line here, is if you do go first, yep, hunky-dory, you scout move them 6, super duper. But if you don't go first and you go second, you can basically zoom it over here, and given it can scout move, it can basically zoom in there. It can zoom into no man's land and basically deny the fact your opponent can shoot down this fire lane, Likewise over here, let's pretend, for whatever example, you're thinking about scout moving here, but maybe for whatever reason they could bust out here and shoot you. Sure, you can go 6 there. Let's just see if 6 will actually protect that unit. And I don't think it will, probably because they can cut an angle there. So again, can you create space to basically allow that unit to basically go, boop, just tuck in the terrain there, be completely safe. Now that basically means you need to basically then manage the rest of your army around that. So if we do think about this example here, if I've plonked that Taurox there, and I want to give myself the option to do that, let's pretend this Chimera is also here, it's parked up against on the deployment zone here. Is basically that means you've just basically stopped yourself from doing that, because you can't actually scout into that space. So it means you need to create space for that option, so you can basically tuck it in nice and neat there to protect yourself, and likewise over here. Do remember with that, and you can be quite cheeky with this, is that do remember that your units your vehicles can move over infantry, but they can't, of course, finish on top of the model, but they can't move through other vehicles, So if I did put these jungle fighters here, and I'm thinking, oh crap, I might actually ram myself in here, let's say that this Taurox is here. Let's just see if it actually could move. It could move 6, probably not actually. But in this example, again, maybe you've got these chaps pushed back like that, like this, and like that, and then like that, and then basically scout move 6. Yep, cool. Not finishing on top of anybody, breaking the core rules of 40k. And you are nice and safe there, Cool. Okay, so that is basically setting up for going first or going second. Because again, you don't want to be just scout moving for the sake of it. If you're just going to let your opponent kill loads of stuff. So if this scout moves 6 here, pretend, and then basically they can cut a fire line here, and they basically all they do, and they just kills a vehicle turn 1, then you've achieved nothing. And that's a key thing. I think it took me a long time to realise, is that every movement you make, what is it trying to achieve? Now that sounds super basic, but there's no point in this example just scout moving 6 here. If you went second, you're playing into something quite shooty, they just pop out and blast a Taurox for scot-free, with nothing you can do against them, of course. So that's that one. That's quite an easy one. And the last one is maximising early secondaries. Now again, for guard broadly, this shouldn't be an issue. Early secondaries would be area denial, sabotage, recover assets, and containment. It's always my favourite, containment. Containment requires you to be outside deployment zone and basically completing an action within 9 inches of a table edge. So in this example here, again, you want to make sure they've got unit down here. So let's pretend this Chimera's here. It could definitely move out. Plonk itself there to do containment. Sure, it might die next turn, but it's scoring 3 points. And likewise over here, maybe you don't have much stuff deployed here, is you want to have a scout move unit, which if you went first, if you won the roll-off, you basically scout move at 6. And then already I believe that is within 9, so you could basically, and then of course you give it an order, you can move it a bit more, make it +1 OC, whatever it is, to actually sort of make it survive a bit longer, for example, but you're basically maximising, get containment turn 1. Likewise is that if you get area denial, you need to be within 3, I believe, of the centre of the board. So in this instance here, you would scout move. If you went first, you'd scout move your 6-inch dudes here. And given you only need to be within 6, is basically you could put one chap out there. He's within 3 inches of the centre of the board, and the rest of the chaps are forming coherency at 1 inch off the wall. And crucially, what that means is you're not wasting an order, yeah? Because if let's pretend they were caddy and shock and they don't have scout move, you need to basically give them an order, plus 3 movement equals 9, and that would probably get them there, maybe with a 1 inch advance roll. But again, you're sucking up orders, you're just gobbling up an order, which could be achieved by a scout move. So do watch that for that. And likewise, of course, for recover assets and also sabotage. Again, if you can scout move dudes, they can go in there. You can then give them a different order versus, say, move. It's just about creating options, yeah. So that's it, I think. That's pretty straightforward, but I think I'll just read out a couple of points now. Again, maximise the screen the right way. Either it's a conga line or it's in a transport. So obviously conga lines are fantastic when it's just going to rush you turn 1 and gum you up. And obviously Tauroxes in a transport is fantastic because obviously it means they're survivable, yeah. And transports, broadly speaking, in 40k 10th edition are very, very strong, given that vehicles are broadly more tougher than they were, say, in 9th edition or even 8th edition. And obviously it protects your squishy infantry before they get blasted by bolters, for example. Basically look out for when to deploy them, because your opponent's got infiltrate. That's the ultimate way to basically turn off scout moves, is if they've got one infiltrate unit, you force them to deploy that eventually, then you know where the infiltrate unit is, say over here. You're like, cool, okay, they're over there, I'm going to put all my scout units here, for example, yeah. Now, of course, as I said, you can still actually scout move, because if they've only got infiltrate, and they put them there, you've got to be outside 9 inches of your opponent's deployment zone, which means you still can scout move 3 inches, yeah? And depending what that unit is, maybe you will do that because, maybe you do actually want to scout move these jungle fighters here because, again, maybe your opponent does decide to charge in maybe a scout sentinel into a limb rust battle tank, for example, just to gum you up in a deployment zone. So, you can typically still scout move a little bit, and every inch counts as the joke in 40k. It all matters. So do watch out for that. And then, as I said, do set up for going first and second, so give yourself the option to basically scout into cover versus scouting forward if you go first. And then obviously always maximise your early secondaries. So let's go back to my very ugly PowerPoint presentation. So to close off this how-to video, how to use guard units, we're speaking now for 26 minutes or 27 minutes. The key themes are we've got lots of options now, which is really awesome. As said previously, we had Jungle Fighters, Kasrikin and Scout Sentinels. Now with the new codex, we've got Kreig Engineers, Catchan Heavy Weapon teams. Very interesting option there. And also the Catchan Command Squad. They're a great way of setting up your game plan. I didn't sort of discuss it much on Tabletop Simulator, but as said, Guard, broadly speaking, still is an army which likes a plan. You like to get early movement, push stuff out, basically deny your opponent lots of board space, have ability to score secondaries, turn off primaries, and an extra 6 inches or 9 inches on a Scout Sentinel is a fantastic way to get the game going. Now, of course, do make sure you think about how they will help you in different matchups. Now, again, the best example I've got, which I learned at the tough lesson, is into World Eaters. In that example, putting out 20 jungle fighters in a conga line, scout moving 6, denying that turn 1 charge is the ultimate use of that. But again, Catchan Jungle Fighters, I'm going to keep saying they're a fantastic one because they're cheap and they're OC2. Maybe your opponent's got no battle line, for example. They've decided not to take battle line units and you've got the OC advantage. So you scout moving your Jungle Fighters into a position where they're safe, but also could maybe, if we go back to Tabletop Simulator, turn off this objective in turn 2, yeah? And put your opponent back on a 5, for example, 5 points of primary. So do sort of understand that. That takes experience, and I'm by no means an expert with that type of thing. But always, always, always think about how the scout move can help you win the game. And I didn't put it here, but with that, it goes back to one point I made, is you want to make sure you actually are scout moving. Because again, just like any data sheet in 40k, is you are paying for all the rules in the data sheet. So if you don't scout move a Scout Sentinel at 55 points, let's agree you're not spending 10% of its value, for example, like Kreig Engineers or Kasrikin, etc., etc. Is because every single rule in this data sheet is being costed by GW, and you should be taking advantage of that. Cool, so that's it. Hopefully a helpful video on how to actually use scout units. As said, I'll less focus on the individual units, what they do on their data sheet, but more how to use that unit overall. Make sure you check out the playlist I've got for this somewhere, which pops up here. I've done other videos like Limit Rush Battle Tanks, Battle Line, Kasrikin, Artillery, and if there's any more you want me to do let me know in the comments what other type of units you'd like me to sort of think about and talk about. But yeah, so any questions or comments, if I've got anything wrong, please tell me. I'd love to hear from you. And likewise, if you want to support my channel, you can do so with a like, comment, or by subscribing, joining my Patreon Platoon, or becoming a channel member. Also, I've just had printed a load of custom dice by Dice Baron in America. So I got these for sale. I'll put a little explanation how to buy. Basically, send me an email at a very, very affordable price for these cool custom dice by Dice Baron. I'll post them anywhere around the world for you. So super thanks to all my subscribers and patrons, and also my channel members, as it always motivates me to make more videos for you in the Guard community. Let's get your bayonet sharp, las gun oiled. Faith from the Emperor strong. Patreon Platoon, sound off.
Tank Commander Glenn, Tank Commander Mitchell, Tank Commander Watchdog Van Etten, Lieutenant Burke Nielsen, Lieutenant Smith, Colour Sergeant DuPont, Sergeants Adal, Scott, the Colonel Merrill, Veteran Gibson, Hall, Lundeen, Guardsman Beard, Coquelin, Easing, Wood, Hills, Malik, Nitton, Nguyen, Tompkin, Conscript England, Evan Gunn, Goodwin, Honorary Members Bolgram King, Psyche Smith, Tempestus Cyan Gaylard.